Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Dairy Cattle Nutrition Conference. My name is Troy Ott, and I'm a professor in the Department of Animal Sciences. I'm a reproductive biologist that studies establishment and maintenance of pregnancy, and particularly how the immune system is involved in that process. And as you look at dairy cattle and the challenges that affect fertility in dairy cattle, it is increasingly clear that how well the cow gets through the transition period has a large impact on whether she will cycle and subsequently get pregnant after the voluntary waiting period. So this has led my interest along the path of determining factors which can affect immune function in the transition period in dairy cattle. And there's been a lot of interest in targeted fat feeding and its effect on immune function. So today I'm going to talk about omega-3 fatty acid supplementation and its effects on reproduction and immune function in dairy cattle. The bottom line from my talk today is that omega-3 fatty acids can alter immune function, leading to improved reproduction and milk production. But just about like everything else in life, there are no silver bullets. Responses to omega-3 supplementation can be variable and are affected by a number of factors. But before we get into talking about specific targeted fat feeding, let's talk a little bit about fat in general. This slide shows a bear named 435 Holly, and she won the Fat Bear Week competition in 2019, displaying an impressive amount of stored body fat. We all know that stored body fat allows animals to bridge between unpredictable food availability. It's an evolutionary response. And in the case of bears, it allows them to take advantage of times of extreme nutrient availability, and they can store that fat to be used at later times. However, we now know that fat is more than just stored energy. We know that fat produces endocrine hormones that can regulate many aspects of physiology. For example, cows that have too little body fat don't produce enough of a hormone called leptin, and they will not cycle. Even beyond fat as an endocrine tissue, it is increasingly clear that the composition of fat stored in those tissues can affect the animal's physiology. This means that the types of fats we consume or that we feed to our animals can affect their health and a wide array of biological processes, including milk production, health, and reproduction. So to get a better handle on this, we must first learn just a little bit about fat chemistry. The term lipid comes from the Greek word lipos, which was used to describe animal fat or vegetable oil. And in general, lipids can be classified into two broad categories: glycerol-based lipids and non-glycerol-based lipids. Non-glycerol-based lipids in the feed include the waxes and alkanes, which are part of the cuticle covering on plant surfaces. The cuticle is very important to the plant in protecting against water loss and invasion of pathogens. However, they have little nutritional value to the animal and also reduce plant digestibility and availability. Glycerol-based lipids can be broken down into simple and compound lipids. The simple lipids include the triglycerides, which are the primary storage form of fats in animals and plants. Compound lipids include glycolipids and phospholipids. Both of these types of lipids are abundant members of cell membranes in plants and animals. If we look further at the structure of the different types of lipids, we see that lipids are composed of fatty acids, particularly the storage form of lipids, triglycerides, and phospholipids. Another form of lipid that we won't spend too much time with are steroids, and the molecule shown on this slide is cholesterol, and cholesterol is the precursor for all steroid hormones. And our bodies have the ability to produce cholesterol, to synthesize phospholipids, and to synthesize triglycerides. However, when it comes to fatty acid composition of these molecules, some fatty acids are not easily synthesized in the body and must be provided in the diet. In addition, these fatty acids, their composition can affect various physiological functions in the animal. So let's now focus on the fatty acids that make up these major forms of lipids in the body. So in general, fatty acids can be divided into saturated fatty acids and unsaturated fatty acids. This designation of saturation is focused on the fact that the lipid molecule, the fatty acid, is made up of a long chain of carbon atoms. And these carbon atoms like to participate in 4 single bonds. Fatty acids, where all the carbons in the chain participate in 4 single bonds, are referred to as saturated fatty acids. As you can see, each carbon molecule is participating in 4 bonds. Unsaturated fatty acids occur when one or more of the carbons are not participating in 4 bonds. And you can see in this monounsaturated fatty acids, these 2 carbon molecules share a double bond and do not participate in 4 double bonds. So when we think about the unsaturated fatty acids, we can further classify them into monounsaturated fatty acids and polyunsaturated fatty acids. And it's this latter group, the polyunsaturated fatty acids, that we're going to focus on today. We're going to talk about omega-6 fatty acids and omega-3 fatty acids. The fatty acids, most of the fatty acids that are required for functions can be produced by the body. However, linoleic acid and linolenic acid are both essential fatty acids, meaning that they must be consumed in the diet because they're not able to be synthesized by the body. This slide shows linoleic and linolenic acid, and it discusses the fact that polyunsaturated fatty acids have more than 1 double bond between carbon atoms. And so as we look at how we define these polyunsaturated fatty acids, they get their name from the position of the double bonds relative to their omega end. And these fatty acid chains have an omega end here and an alpha end here. Omega-6 fatty acids are termed that because the first double bond occurs at the 6th carbon after in from the omega end. And omega-3 fatty acids get their name because the first double bond occurs at the 3rd carbon in from the omega end. These double bonds create differences in structure in these fatty acids that give them different properties. And as I mentioned before, linoleic and linolenic acid are considered essential fatty acids. Because they're essential and they cannot be synthesized, they must be provided in the diet. In addition to these essential fatty acids, there are several other fatty acids that are considered conditionally essential, meaning in some situations and under some conditions, their production by the body could be inadequate to meet the needs. These include the fatty acid arachidonic acid, as well as the omega-3 fatty acids EPA and DHA. Now, dairy cow diets generally are very high in omega-6 fatty acids. However, dairy diets generally are rather low in omega-3 fatty acids. Omega-3 fatty acids are components of forage, and also they are found in oil seeds. So this figure shows the structural comparisons for omega-6 and omega-3 fatty acids. So linoleic acid is an omega-6 fatty acid, and it serves as a precursor molecule for the synthesis of arachidonic acid. Now, arachidonic acid goes on and can be converted to a number of bioactive compounds in the body that regulate immune function. And so in this regard, the composition of the diet relative to omega-6 fatty acids can alter the substrate and the precursor for a number of important molecules that regulate immune function. Omega-3 fatty acids from plants come in the form of alpha linolenic acid. And alpha linolenic acid then can be converted to a number of longer chain omega-3 fatty acids, including DHA and EPA. And DHA and EPA are omega-3 fatty acids that are considered to be dietary components that improve health. Both omega-6 and omega-3 fatty acids, therefore, create precursors for hormone synthesis in the body. Omega-6 creates arachidonic acid, and arachidonic acid can be converted to leukotrienes, thromboxanes, and a number of pro-inflammatory products which can increase inflammation, including having effects to increase platelet aggregation, vascular permeability, to increase cytokine release, and chemotaxis. All these effects help in an immune response. The omega-3 fatty acids can generate EPA, and EPA can be converted into other active hormones that have either anti-inflammatory effects or help resolve immune reactions. These include reducing platelet aggregation, reducing chemotaxis, and cytokine production. So you can look at these two fatty acids, omega-6 and omega-3 fatty acids, as creating a balance between inflammation and resolution of inflammation. Now, there are a number of sources of omega-3 fatty acids, and the most abundant plant source of omega-3 fatty acids is flaxseed. In flaxseed, roughly half of the fatty acids in flaxseed is the omega-3 fatty acid, alpha linolenic acid. And you can see this generates a high concentration of omega-3 fatty acids in flaxseed. Another source of omega-3 fatty acids that can be added to dairy diets is fish meal or fish oil. Fish meal and fish oil also have a high percentage of omega-3 fatty acids, and they are the only source of EPA and DHA. The other oil seeds in typical dairy diets do not contain any EPA and DHA. Another thing that's important to examine when looking at feeding fatty acids is the ratio of omega-6 to omega-3. And you'll probably have heard in humans in our Western diet, we consume much more omega-6 fatty acid than we do omega-3 fatty acids. And current dietary recommendations are that we reduce omega-6 fats and we increase omega-3 fatty acids in our diet. And so a lower ratio translates into better health outcomes for humans. Dairy diets are also very high in omega-6 relative to omega-3. So targeted feeding of fats can help alter the ratio of omega-6 to omega-3 fatty acids towards a more desirable and balanced ratio. So I indicated that dietary fats affect many processes in animals. The fats that are fed affect the compositions of lipids throughout the body, as lipid stores reflect the intake of the animal. Dietary fatty acids are an energy-dense fuel, helping to support dairy cows, especially during times when they're under metabolic stress due to the high demands of lactation. Fatty acids are the building blocks for cellular membranes. Fatty acids can also affect the composition of the rumen microbiota. And as I mentioned previously, these fatty acids can be metabolized into bioactive oxylipids that affect many cellular processes in the body. In a recent paper in Progressive Dairyman, Renee Smith presented this concept of targeted fat feeding or precision fat feeding in dairy cattle. And the idea is to get optimal health, production, and reproduction. Nutritional strategies should be pursued that balance omega-6 fatty acids with omega-3 fatty acids in sort of a yin and yang relationship, with omega-6 fatty acids promoting inflammation. This would help clear infections, and omega-3 fatty acids helping to then resolve that inflammation and return the animal to normal physiology, sparing energy. So as you can see, the diet of the dairy cow contains components that are very high in omega-6 fatty acids. Corn, cottonseed, corn silage, and soybean meal all contain abundant omega-6 fatty acids, whereas omega-3 fatty acids are primarily provided by forage, including things like fresh alfalfa and a number of oil seeds, predominant among them flaxseed, but also fish meal. So dairy nutritionists think about providing precision fat feeding to affect a number of physiological functions in dairy cattle. Failure to feed the correct fatty acids can compromise performance, and overfeeding fatty acids can have negative effects on performance. Fatty acids which need to be included in the diet include things like palmitic acid, which is used directly by the udder and improves butterfat production. Oleic acid, C18-1, is a great energy source in the diet and can reduce negative energy balance and reduce body fat mobilization. Linoleic acid, or C18-2, also called omega-6 fatty acid, is an essential fatty acid which is not produced by the cow, as I indicated, but has an impact on growth and reproductive performance, and also aids in parturition. And then the 18-3 omega-3, C18-3 or omega-3 fatty acids, including alpha linolenic acid, EPA, and DHA, can affect reproduction and immunity. And that's what I'm going to focus on today with my comments: the effects of polyunsaturated fatty acids on immune function in dairy cows. So before we talk about the effects of fat on the immune system, it's probably worthwhile to just give an overview of immune function. The immune system is a force that links all organ systems in the body. And many of us think of immunity just in the context of disease, but the immune system participates in just about every life process in the body. Certainly health and disease, but also regulating growth, regulating function of the brain, maintaining tissue homeostasis, mediating the effects of stress, and it participates in the establishment of pregnancy, the maintenance of pregnancy, and parturition. Just about every system in the body is regulated to some degree by the immune system. So let's take a look at a broad overview of the immune system. The immune system is composed of two major components, the two faces of immunology, of immunity: the innate immune system and the adaptive immune system. The innate immune system is a more ancient, evolutionarily, a more ancient immune system. And the adaptive immune system is a more recent adaptation of immunity. The innate immune system has a number of cellular components that are included in this purple circle, and the adaptive immune system has a number of cellular components shown in this peach-colored circle. Each of these arms of the immune system have key players. For example, the innate side, the innate immune system, has cells that include macrophages and neutrophils that play a key role in detecting and eliminating pathogens that are invading the body. These cells are phagocytic cells, meaning that they can consume and digest invading microbes and eliminate them from the body. These are major components of the innate immune system. And the innate immune system is a general immune system that is ready to respond on a moment's notice to any disruption in normal physiology. The adaptive immune system is a bit different. The adaptive immune system is designed to tailor the immune response to the specific pathogen. However, the adaptive immune system takes a bit of time to activate in response to an infection. So in the case of most pathogens, your innate system immediately responds and begins to eliminate the invading microorganism, and in most cases succeeds. However, it does, in the case where it doesn't succeed in completely eliminating the invading pathogen, it buys time for the adaptive immune system, which is a much slower response, to be upregulated and to generate a very specific immunity. The other thing about the adaptive immune system, which makes it a very powerful evolutionary adaptation, is once the animal is exposed to a pathogen and the adaptive immune system has been activated, it leaves behind a group of cells called memory cells. And these memory cells circulate in the blood and can be activated weeks, months, and even years or decades later upon the second exposure to the same pathogen. And in fact, our vaccination strategy on our farms is designed to activate adaptive immunity and generate a memory response so that when the animal is exposed to the actual pathogen, the adaptive response will occur much more quickly and much more effectively. Now, immune responses have a beginning, a middle, and an end. And it's important to upregulate the immune system to fight an acute inflammatory, or to generate an acute inflammatory response to fight an infection. However, it's just as important to then have that immune response come to an end once the pathogen has been cleared. And we call that resolution. And you can see in this graph below that there are phases to the immune system that involve first the initiation of an immune reaction. And this is going to be using those cells that are involved in innate immunity. And particularly, it's going to involve the neutrophils that are able to phagocytize and clear invading microbes. And as those components of the innate immune response begin to reduce the load of invading pathogens, then the immune response switches and it goes from an initiation or activation stage to a resolution stage. And that switch is regulated by lipid mediators. Early in inflammation, there are lipid mediators like prostaglandins, leukotrienes, and thromboxanes that activate an acute inflammatory reaction. And as the animal then moves to the resolution phase, this is mediated by a different class of lipid mediators that include molecules like resolvins and anti-inflammatory cytokines, which then shut down the immune response. So when you think about immunity, think about activation and resolution. And any of you who have allergies or know someone who have allergies understand how dangerous an unrestrained activated immune system can be. And so the immune system is finely tuned to use a combination of cells, cytokines, and lipid mediators to initiate and then resolve an immune function. And at the center of that switch are lipid mediators derived from polyunsaturated fatty acids. So if you look at the transition cow creates a number of problems which can delay that resolution arm of the immune response. Energy availability is a particular challenge in transition cows. First, we see in late gestation decreased intake in the weeks leading up to parturition, and this can result in reduced energy reserves. And then around parturition, the endocrine changes occurring in the cow and the increased energy demands of lactation can further put the animal in negative energy balance. Now, this is a problem because around parturition, the cow is likely to be exposed to pathogens, and those pathogens must be cleared. And so what would be optimal is a transition cow that generates a rapid immune response, and that immune response is effective and then resolves just as rapidly. However, negative energy balance can result in problems that will slow that resolution of the immune response. This then leaves the animal in a state of heightened systemic inflammation. And heightened systemic inflammation is a huge energy drain on the animal. In addition, the activated immune system can also result in tissue damage. And this sort of chronic inflammation has been shown to clearly result in reduced fertility and infertility. So targeted fat feeding is a strategy to optimize immune function in transition cows. We have fats in the omega-6 family of polyunsaturated fatty acids that can promote immune function and help clear infections like metritis and mastitis that occur around parturition. And we have omega-3 fatty acids that can then promote anti-inflammatory responses and can benefit the resolution phase of immunity. Interestingly, a number of studies have indicated that fatty acids can selectively impact reproductive function. For example, omega-3 fatty acids have been shown to stimulate folliculogenesis. They can increase cleavage rate. They can reduce uterine production of prostaglandins, and they can reduce pregnancy loss. So a combination of pro-inflammatory omega-6 fatty acids can enhance immune responses, facilitating clearance of pathogens. However, too much inflammation can result in increased energy expenditure and tissue damage. Omega-3 fatty acids can facilitate resolution of inflammation and can help ensure proper resolution and immune responses, and also spare energy for the animal. So as we think about how these fatty acids affect immune function, let's briefly introduce the primary cell types in the immune system and discuss some of the effects of these polyunsaturated fatty acids on their function. So I told you one of the primary components to the innate immune response are phagocytic cells. And phagocytic cells are immune cells that can move throughout the bloodstream and move into tissues. And they are attracted into tissues where infection occurs, like an infected mammary gland or an infected uterus. And once in those tissues, they can pursue and engulf bacteria and digest those bacteria. Macrophages and neutrophils are two primary phagocytes of the immune system that play very essential roles in clearing infection from tissues. And we now know that macrophages their function is affected by polyunsaturated fatty acids. In particular, when it comes to the omega-3 fatty acids, it is clear that omega-3 fatty acids can change the phenotype of the macrophage from one that is involved in immune activation to one that is involved in resolution. So this figure shows a macrophage at the center, and it shows the effects of polyunsaturated fatty acids in the purple lines and arrows, and saturated fatty acids in the golden colored lines and arrows. So for example, upon exposure to polyunsaturated fatty acids, particularly omega-3 fatty acids, macrophages will move from an inflammatory profile to what we refer to as an M2 or anti-inflammatory profile. And this will include production of resolution of cytokines that are involved in immune resolution, like interleukin 10. Polyunsaturated fatty acids like omega-3 fatty acids can also reduce production of pro-inflammatory cytokines like TNF-alpha and interleukin 6. Neutrophils are the other major phagocytic cell and an important component of the innate arm of the immune system. I consider neutrophils to be the foot soldiers in immunity and the battle for health. Neutrophils are the most abundant white blood cell in the immune system. And in dairy cattle, neutrophils will represent between 50 and 70% of the white blood cells you will find in cattle. So neutrophils are also responsive to fatty acids. Particularly omega-6 fatty acids can enhance neutrophil phagocytosis or neutrophil eating. And omega-6 fatty acids can enhance pro-inflammatory cytokine production, and they can stimulate neutrophil migration into tissues at the sites of inflammation. On the other hand, omega-3 fatty acids can enhance the resolving capabilities of neutrophils and can stimulate them to produce hormones that will promote immune resolution. T cells are another important component of the immune response. And T cells are like the generals of the immune system. They both receive information about the nature of the microorganism that's attacking the body, and they can also direct the various cell types in the immune response to that pathogen. T cells are also affected by omega-3 fatty acids. In particular, omega-3 fatty acids reduce the pro-inflammatory cytokine production of immune cells. Omega-3 fatty acids will reduce proliferation of pro-inflammatory T cells. They will also stimulate the development of a type of T cell called a regulatory T cell, which are major players in the resolution phase of immunity. So the picture you get from from these last three slides are that polyunsaturated fatty acids, omega-3 fatty acids and omega-6 fatty acids, work in balance to ensure appropriate activation of immune cells, to drive immune cells to the site of infection, to stimulate them to proliferate and produce cytokines that will help in the inflammatory response. And omega-3 fatty acids will then help ensure that once the pathogen is cleared, that the cytokine production will shift, the function of the immune cells will shift, and it will result in a resolution phase that will then allow the tissue to return to normal homeostasis, will avoid any tissue damage, and will spare energy use by the immune system. So this slide shows cytotoxic T cells, and these T cells circulate in the body. And in this particular little video, they're shown identifying a cancerous cell. Once they identify a cell that is stressed, either because it's a cancerous cell or because it's become infected with a virus or a bacteria, those cells exhibit stress proteins on their surface. And cytotoxic T cells can recognize those stress proteins on the surface. They then can bind to that cell and basically inject enzymes that will result in the death of that cell. Now, the immune system exists throughout the body, and you certainly are familiar with the fact that white blood cells circulate throughout the blood of animals, and that's certainly the case. But there is an immune system that's present in just about every tissue throughout the body. So any tissue you will examine, you will find abundant immune cells. And this is a picture of the uterus from some work done in our lab that shows immune cells here in red in the uterine lining during the estrous cycle in dairy cattle here, day 17 of the estrous cycle, and day 17 of pregnancy and day 20 of pregnancy. And what you can see here, here's the uterine lumen. This is where the embryo would be attaching to the uterine wall. You can see in very close proximity to the embryo are abundant immune cells. And in fact, the number of those immune cells increases during early pregnancy. These immune cells are critically involved in establishment of pregnancy. And in fact, one of the first things that the embryo does when it arrives in the uterus is it begins to reprogram these cells to facilitate formation of a placenta. Later, as the placenta is formed, immune cells in the uterus will help participate in the process of placentation and also nutrient transfer during gestation. And finally, at the end of gestation, there will be changes in immune function that will help terminate the pregnancy, that will result in release of the placenta at parturition. So the immune system is intimately involved in the establishment and maintenance and then termination of pregnancy. After parturition, that uterus has to undergo a remarkable transformation from an organ that contains a calf that weighs maybe 85 pounds back, and it has to involute back down to its normal size. During the process of parturition, it's typical that pathogens are introduced into the uterus. And so, for example, here in this slide on your left, you can see a uterus that is filled with immune cells, these bright purple nuclei filling the uterine lumen in a postpartum cow. And you can also see abundant immune cells in the tissue of the uterus during that period of uterine involution. Now, it is fairly common for cows to develop a uterine infection postpartum, and that uterine infection is referred to as metritis. Typically, those infections will resolve and the immune system will be sufficiently robust to be able to clear pathogens and then participate in repair of the uterine lining and involution postpartum. In some cases, however, that metritis can penetrate the uterine wall and develop into endometritis. And endometritis is a real problem because it really reduces the productivity of that animal and increases the probability that animal will be culled from the herd. As many as 15 to 20% of the animals that develop metritis will progress to endometritis. And so this normal process of clearing bacteria, healing the uterus, and resolving inflammation has to occur in the immediate postpartum period. And if the animal's immune system is impaired, that will not occur, and that will put that animal at great risk for calving. So it's important that proper calving management and nutrition postpartum be utilized. And more people are thinking about and incorporating targeted fat feeding during this postpartum period to help first enhance immune function, and then later to make sure that the immune reaction is resolved, to make sure that tissue damage is limited and energy is spared. This particularly beautiful picture is a colorized image of mammary tissue. And you can see a number of alveolar sacs here, and you can see the ducts that would then collect the milk from those alveolar sacs. But importantly, this slide shows in purple across the surface of these alveoli are immune cells. And immune cells are a critical component of the mammary gland. And if their function is not optimal, if their function is impaired, that can result in mastitis. And mastitis certainly has a number of negative impacts, including reducing milk yield and quality. It can, in severe cases, lead to permanent impairment of mammary gland function. And mastitis, severe cases of mastitis, affect the onset or resumption of cyclicity, which will impair subsequent fertility in dairy cattle. So acute inflammation in response to pathogen is essential. And feeding strategies and management strategies can be put in place to optimize that acute inflammatory response. However, chronic inflammation is a problem in transition dairy cattle. And that occurs when that resolution phase of the immune response does not occur. And remember, that resolution phase is highly dependent upon omega-3 fatty acids. So in this figure taken from a review written by Barry Bradford in 2015, you can see there are a number of processes in transition dairy cows that can contribute to chronic inflammation, sort of shown here as a flame. Stress can contribute to chronic inflammation. Social stress and heat stress. In addition, feeding high energy diets that lead to rumen acidosis can result in leaky gut, which can allow bacterial cell wall components to cross the gastrointestinal tract and result in inflammation. And as I mentioned a few moments ago, metritis in the immediate postpartum period, as well as mastitis, can also contribute to chronic inflammation. And it's this chronic inflammation that will sap the cow of energy, that will exacerbate negative energy balance, and that will ultimately result in reduced fertility. So targeted feeding strategies attempt to balance this activation and resolution. And so when you have inflammation, particularly in places like the gut barrier function breaks down. There's increase in permeability to microbes that results in release of pro-inflammatory cytokines and oxidative stress. And by feeding omega-3 fatty acids, that chronic inflammation can be reduced by healing the epithelium, improving tight junctions, improving the barrier function of the epithelial lining, reducing pro-inflammatory cytokine production, and reducing oxidative stress. So the picture that we're painting here is of an essential period in the cow's life where immune function can be affected by metabolic status. And targeted fat feeding can both help promote appropriate acute immune responses, and targeted fat feeding using omega-3 fatty acids can help resolve those immune responses so the animal is not further compromised by tissue damage or negative energy balance. So in the last couple of slides, I want to talk about, just to give you a brief overview of a study that we are completing examining the effects of a commercial flaxseed supplement on milk production, immunity, and fertility. This was a large trial done on a commercial dairy in Pennsylvania, and we wanted to test the hypothesis that feeding an omega-3 fatty acid could alter or improve immune function, and that then would result in enhanced fertility. This trial consisted of 6 60-day feeding periods where the treatment diet was fed during the transition period only. So the treatment diet was fed from about 3 weeks prior to calving to about 3 weeks after calving, and the treatment diet included a commercially available omega-3 fat supplement called Linpro. Over the course of the year, roughly 1,700 cows and heifers were included in the measurements we took on the dairy. Some of these data were presented last year at the ADSA annual meeting. Those data, together with additional data, are currently in preparation for submission. So I only just briefly mention a few of the major findings from this study. So first of all, milk and plasma omega-3 concentration was greater in the flaxseed supplemented group versus the control group. And this resulted in an improvement in the omega-6 to omega-3 ratio in these cows, both in the blood and in the milk. Secondly, there was a difference in how cows responded to the supplementation, depending on whether they were first lactation heifers or second plus lactation cows. So for example, incorporation of omega-3 ALA in the milk was greater for the second plus lactation cows compared to the first lactation heifers. In addition, milk yield was greater in cows receiving the flaxseed supplement over the first 100 days in milk. However, this effect was only seen in the mature cows. And most interesting to us, and me as a reproductive biologist, was that feeding omega-3 fat in the transition period resulted in improved first service conception rates in flaxseed cows compared to control animals. But interestingly, again, this effect was only seen in the first lactation cows and not in the mature cows. Now, I have to point out that this dairy is an extremely well-managed dairy. That's a very high production dairy, and they have very high fertility. And so when fertility is already high, it is very difficult to see further improvements in conception rates. But it was interesting that even in first lactation cows, we were able to see an improvement in conception rates in these animals. So one of the major take-home messages from this study was that responses to omega-3 supplementation differed between these different types of animals. And this is, I think, particularly important. If you think about the typical modern dairy, A very high proportion of the animals in the milking string will be first lactation heifers. They exhibit a number of differences, particularly differences in metabolism and incorporation and effects of omega-3. And we believe that these differences should be more carefully investigated so that targeted feeding of fats can be applied to the animals in the production groups that are most likely to benefit from those added fats in the diet. So, an overall summary, fat feeding increases energy density of the diet and can reduce negative energy balance and increase milk production in transition cows. However, fats differ in their composition and include fatty acids that can affect the physiology of the animal. Polyunsaturated fatty acids serve as precursors for bioactive hormones that can regulate immune function in dairy cattle. In particular, omega-6 fatty acids are abundant in dairy diets, and they can promote inflammation and help clear infections when they arise. Omega-3 fatty acids are less abundant in dairy diets and can serve as a counterbalance to omega-6 fatty acids. This can lead to optimal activation and resolution of inflammation. Due to the energy costs to the cow of an inflammatory response, chronic or unregulated inflammation can contribute to negative energy balance. And negative energy balance further impairs immunity, leading to a snowball effect that results in increased incidence of disease and reduced fertility. So the bottom line is, there is increasing evidence that supports that targeted fat feeding improves health, production, and reproduction of dairy cattle. In particular, the use of omega-3 fatty acid supplements may allow for improved resolution of immune responses that lead to improved fertility in lactating dairy cattle. So thank you very much and have a great day.